What happens when Space Marines turn on fellow Space Marines? Today we're covering the Badab War, the largest Space Marine civil war since the Horus Heresy. By its end, the conflict had consumed billions of lives and ended with the complete annihilation of an entire chapter. In the year of 587 of the 41st millennium, the High Lords of Terror issued an Edict Imperialis ordering several Space Marine chapters to permanently base themselves inside the Maelstrom. This was a chaotic and lawless region of space that contained an estimated 20 plus orc empires, Harad infestations, and countless human pirate strongholds. Not a fun place. The Astral Claws chapter got the senior command role, and their chapter master, Lufgt Huron, was absolutely committed to the mission of bringing order to the Maelstrom. Joining him were the Executioners, the Lamenters, and the Mantis Warriors chapters. Together, they formed the Maelstrom Warders, and for centuries, they actually accomplished much of what they set out to do. Pirate raids dropped to their lowest levels in generations. Trade flourished. The Imperial tithe flowed smoothly. By every measurable metric, Huron was doing his job brilliantly. But here's where the problem started. Huron kept requesting more resources, more Space Marines, and more equipment to finish the job permanently. The High Lords of Terror ignored him and every petition went unanswered. To Huron, this was insulting. He'd been sent to pacify one of the most dangerous regions in the Imperium, succeeded beyond expectations, and was essentially being told to make do with what he had. So he decided to take matters into his own hands. In the year 718 of the 41st millennium, after a failed coup on his base world of Badab Primaris, Huron personally executed much of the planet's ruling class and declared himself Tyrant of Badab. He claimed the entire Badab sector as his chapter's domain. It is then that Huron made his first major mistake. To fund his larger ambitions, he stopped paying the Imperial tithe. His reasoning was straightforward. If the Imperium wouldn't give him resources, he'd cut out the middleman and just keep the resources he generated. But the real problem wasn't the unpaid tithes. The real problem was what Huron was doing with those withheld resources. He was building what he called the Tyrant Legion, a massive military force commanded by Astral Claw Space Marines. On paper, these were just well-trained planetary defense forces. In reality, Huron was hiding additional Astral Claws warriors within these units, inflating his chapter's numbers far beyond the Codex Astartes' mandated 1,000 Marines. To make matters worse, Huron created specialised units within his forces that were deeply disturbed even by Space Marine standards. Among them were the Corpse Takers, apothecaries who harvest gene seeds from fallen Marines, fiend and enemy alike. Also among his forces were the Retaliators, brutal assault troops used for line-breaking and punitive extermination missions against political descendants. It soon became clear that Huron wasn't just building an oversized chapter, but instead, he was building an army loyal only to him, using methods that looked increasingly heretical. For decades, Huron operated as if nothing had changed. The Maelstrom Warders continued their mission, the Badab sector prospered, and the wider Imperium largely ignored what was happening out in the Maelstrom. But by the year 901, the Imperial authorities finally decided enough was enough. The Administratum demanded an audit of the missing Badab sector's tithes, and Huron refused. The Firehawks chapter was sent to enforce compliance, and Huron convinced his fellow Maelstrom Warders and allied chapters, the Executioners, Lamenters, and Mantis Warriors, that this was Imperial overreach and that they must defend the traditional autonomy of the Adeptus Astartes. And that's when things went from politics to open warfare. The investigation fleet attempted to force its way through the Badab system's defensive network, the so-called Ring of Steel. The fleet was fired upon and completely destroyed. Over 20,000 servants of the Imperium were killed. Huron claimed the fleet refused to acknowledge his lawful authority and forced the issue, but the Carthago sector authorities accused him of premeditated murder and treason. The Imperium assembled a massive coalition of Loyalist chapters. Each chapter brought hundreds of battle brothers, and together they represented the full might of the Emperor's wrath and descended into the Maelstrom. But numbers alone don't always win Space Marine conflicts. The Secessionists, as Huron's alliance was now called, had major advantages. They controlled the Badab sector's infrastructure, shipyards, and resources. They had unified command under Huron, while the Loyalists initially struggled with coordination between multiple chapter masters. Meanwhile, The Loyalist forces were fighting on the defensive in a region of space where navigation was already nightmarish. The war quickly settled into a brutal pattern. The Loyalists would mass their forces for a major offensive against a key Secessionist stronghold. The Secessionists would defend with a fanatical determination, making the Loyalists pay for every kilometre in blood. Both sides took horrific casualties, but the strategic math was simple. The Secessionists had limited resources and no way to replace losses, while the Loyalists could be reinforced and resupplied by the wider Imperium. Inside the Maelstrom, the Executioners held the world of vigilance, turning it into a fortress that endured Loyalist assault after Loyalist assault. The Lamenters fought with desperate courage, suffering catastrophic casualties in nearly every engagement. The Astral Claws themselves fought with grim determination, knowing they'd crossed a line from which there was no return. The Loyalists established a blockade around the Badab sector that strangled the Secessionists' supply lines and prevented reinforcement or escape. As the war went on, the truth about Huron's forces became increasingly apparent to the Imperium. The Corpse Takers' activities were exposed, revealing just how far the Astral Claws had fallen. The Executioners, Lamenters, and Mantis Warriors chapters found themselves trapped in an impossible situation. They'd rebelled, believing they were defending Space Marine autonomy against Imperial overreach. Now, they realised they were aligned with heretics and there was no way to come out without being branded traitors. They fought on, not out of belief in Huron's cause, but because surrender meant certain execution. By the year 912, the Secessionists had been pushed back to their final strongholds. The Loyalists had taken horrific casualties, but they systematically reconquered every Secessionist world except one, Badab itself. The final assault on Badab was apocalyptic. The Loyalists massed their full strength, thousands of Space Marines supported by massive naval assets and orbital bombardment capabilities. Huron prepared his defences, concentrating everything he had left around his fortress, the Palace of Thorns. The Tyrant's legion deployed en masse as cannon fodder. The remaining Astral Claws prepared for a last stand. Orbital bombardment levelled entire hive cities. Drop pods rained down by the thousands. Thunderhawks filled the sky. The Firehawks chapter, who suffered heavy losses at the hands of the Astral Claws, led key assaults with determined bravery, breaking through the Secessionists' outer defences, finally getting their revenge. Huron made his last stand surrounded by his most loyal warriors. The Star Phantoms chapter led the final assault, their captain Zrukal Androcles pushing deep into the palace despite catastrophic wounds. In the throne room, Androcles confronted Huron personally. Their duel was brief and brutal. Androcles, suffering from multiple wounds, managed to hit Huron with a point-blank melter blast. The superheated beam destroyed the right side of Huron's body. As Androcles died, his squad finished the job, or thought they did. In reality, the few surviving Astral Claws grabbed their chapter master's broken body and fled into the Maelstrom. With Huron apparently dead and Badab lost, the war ended. But the cost was staggering. Badab itself was rendered a dead world. Its population of 5.17 billion completely exterminated by orbital bombardment to ensure no heretical taint survived. The Loyalist chapters had also suffered terribly. Estimates put their total casualties at over 2,000 Space Marines killed across all participating chapters. These were irreplaceable losses that would take decades to restore. But perhaps the worst consequence was what happened after. Huron had in fact survived. Rebuilt by his chief apothecary and master of the forge into a grotesque cyborg, and now fully corrupted by chaos, he emerged as Huron Blackheart, the Blood Reaver. He renamed his surviving Astral Claws the Red Corsairs and began a campaign of piracy and raiding that continues to this day. The 200 or so surviving Astral Claws became the core of a growing warband that now rivals the Black Legion in size, swelled by renegades, traitors, and captured Loyalist Marines forced into service. The Imperium tried to bury the whole incident, but you can't hide a conflict that consumed dozens of star systems and killed billions. The truth leaked out, corrupted and fragmented, but the core facts remained. Space Marines had rebelled, and killed other Space Marines, and the man who started it all was now serving chaos and growing stronger every year. And somewhere in the Maelstrom, Huron Blackheart is building an empire of renegades and traitors, and eventually, he'll be back. The Badab War is over, but the consequences are just beginning.